Hi guys, it's Mary McIntyre here. Today's video is dragon eyes. So if you follow me online for a long time or you've been to my shop, you will know that I paint dragon eyes like this. So I do them in all different colours and all different sizes, and these bigger ones have many layers, sometimes 15-20 layers of paint on them, and photographs don't do them justice. They've got so many shimmery nail varnishes, metallic nail varnishes, and they take a really long time to do. This is one of the biggest ones that I've done. They're just gorgeous. So I initially learned how to do this by watching videos from Back to Earth Creations. Yvonne Williams over there paints these, and she is the absolute queen of dragon eyes. So that's how I learned how to do this. And last year, a lovely friend of mine asked me to make her some earrings that were painted like dragon eyes, one of them blue and one more red, like the Eye of Sauron colours. But the thing was, she wanted them as earrings, and they had to be these tiny cabochons. So I didn't even know if it was possible to paint dragon eyes on them this small, but I did manage to do it. I will insert a picture in here somewhere on the screen. Unfortunately, she lost one of them and asked me to replace it, and when I asked her to just send me a photo of the back of the other to remind me, it turns out she can't find that one either. So I'm now going to make another pair. Now, it's impossible to make two of these identical. Just the method that you use, it's just really difficult to do that. This is not the same as just cutting out a picture of an eye and sticking it on a cabochon. It's way more intense than that. So I'm going to have another go at creating some more dragon eyes for her. So one of them is going to be Eye of Sauron, as I said. One of them is going to be blue. I've already cleaned those. I'll probably have to wipe them again because I've just been mauling them. So the way that you paint these basically is a lot of the work that is done on these is just done by scraping stuff off rather than painting it on. I don't really have space to do that. So what I did last time is basically pick up the nail varnish with a pin or my awl, depending on the size of whatever it is I want to draw. Then I use the scalpel blade to kind of scrape that off. So I essentially followed the same steps, but obviously with these being so tiny, I mean, you can see how small they are. This is my cutting mat, and each one of these small squares is a centimetre, so they are really small. So yeah, it's not an easy thing to do them this small, especially with some of my dexterity issues and constantly dropping things. But I thought it'd be fun to film me doing this, so you get an idea. There's not really an idea of how I make the big dragon eyes because they are so many more layers, but it just gives you an idea of how I approach it. So I've got my nail varnishes already laid out here, so I'll just move the camera up. So you can see that I've got the black, which I'll be using on both of them, reds, orange, yellows, and a metallic gold for the Eye of Sauron. And then I've got some dark blue, pale blue, and a couple of blue metallics as well. And the black will be the pupil and the edge on the blue one. So hopefully this will go smoothly. I was quite surprised when I did it last time and managed to pull it off. So hopefully I can do it a second time. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is get the pupil on there. Then while that's drying, I can do the edge. I've got some kitchen roll and nail varnish remover handy for wiping off my utensils and my fingers, because it is impossible to do these without getting nail varnish all over your hands. So first of all, I've got a new black because it's handy to have a black nail varnish that is nice and fluid. And I really like the Barry M nail varnishes. I think they're fantastic. So what I'm going to do is use my awl and just pick up some of the nail varnish on the awl. And I'm probably got too much there. Now, try to lay some of that down. This is incredibly fiddly, even harder to try to film. So once it's on there, I'm just using the point to feather the edges Now there's not a lot of room for detail on these at all, so you just kind of have to do the best you can, trying to elongate that and just feather the edges. If you take too much out of the middle, it's easy to put that back on. The important thing at this step is to kind of get that feathering right. Every now and again, just hold it up to the light so you can see what you're doing. When the nail varnish gets tacky, that is also a good time to manipulate it and feather it out. Okay, that's feathered, so I'm going to clean off my awl. I'm just going to pick up a bit more and just make the centre of that pupil nice and dark again. Just pick that up and just dab this in the middle. So that's one done. Repeat on the other side. It's actually easier from holding it perspective to actually do this sideways initially, just to get the dot of the pupil on. Okay, the next step, normally you would hold this and just gently feather the edge with the nail varnish, so you don't want much on the brush. So I'm going to scrape most of it off because you want the edge to be feathery as well, and you're going to go in and kind of dig into this, but especially with these really small ones, there just isn't the space to do a lot here. So I am just kind of feathering this, but a lot of it is going to get chopped into, so don't put too much on, but you just want a bit of a dark border, and that just gives depth and contrast for when you're doing the lighter parts in a minute. So the brush, I wiped most of the nail varnish off, so it sort of feathers when you just catch the edge like that, just feathering it in. I'm going to repeat the process on the other one. So at this point, even though these eyes are different colours, the black is the same for both. So I'm doing this step at the same time. I'm going to push that one I've just painted to the side a little bit, and I'm going to go in with my scalpel blade now, and I'm just going to nibble into this. So I put the point down and I go from the inside out, and that scrapes outwards. But what it can also do as a happy accident is, particularly on the bigger ones, is if it picks up a bit of product on the blade, when you next go in and drag down, it can deposit kind of like a slight inner dark edge. Now that kind of thing does not show up that well on these tiny ones, but it works really, really well on the bigger dragon eyes. Probably enough feathering there. This one, the feathering didn't come out quite as well, so this bit is super important for blending that down. So what I want to do now is cover all of the clear bit, because I don't have space to do an awful lot more with regards to feathering. So what I want to do first is put the metallic layer down, because then we're going to scrape most of that off, but what remains will give it a really nice sort of shine. So it'll give it a shine and a sparkle, and the amount that's left on should be minimal. But it should look really nice. It's what helps to give it so much depth. So you can do that at this stage, or you can add just one layer of the darker. But if I was doing a bigger dragon eye, I would go in with more colour first, but there's just not space on these. So this is a stunning metallic gold Barry M. It's called Foil. I've had this one for ages, but you need so little of it. So give that a shake. So the left hand one is going to be the Eye of Sauron, so I'm going to put the gold on that. So I'm going to try to make sure I don't pull away the thick black from the middle of that pupil. So I'm going from the inside out. carefully painting that. And on the blue one, this is another Barry M Molten Metal. This is a beautiful pale blue. This has more sparkle in it. When you're doing these, the thick glitter doesn't work quite so well as these really lovely metallic foil or shimmery ones. You need the kind of metallic pigments to be very, very small particles. So this one is very sparkly, but the sparkly glitter is tiny. So that gives you a really nice result. If you use the ones with thick chunky glitter, it doesn't quite give the right effect. So especially when you go ahead and scrape a lot of that off. So I like to leave this layer to dry almost completely before touching it, because if you try to drag away from this now and it gets sticky, it can lift away huge clumps, and we don't really want that. So I'm going to let those dry for a few minutes before I come in and start scratching away some of that. So I will try to hold these up so you can see what they look like from the other side at this point. They're pretty as they are, to be honest. So that's the blue just with the black pupil. Ah, these are so fiddly. And that's what the gold, gold with the black pupil looks like. They're pretty already just as they are, so I'm gonna leave those to dry and then I'll be back. So it's time to scrape this layer. Now normally on these sort of bigger dragon eyes, a scalpel and an awl is usually all you need, but these are so tiny that the point of the awl can actually take away a bit too much. So what you're aiming for really is lots of small layers, and some of this is done by mixing when the nail varnish is wet, which I'll probably do on the last step. But for this bit, I'm just going to use this pin which has got a tiny point on it, and I'm just going to scrape outwards. And what you need to do here is scrape away enough that the next lot of colours are going to show through. So it may feel like you're taking away more than you're leaving, but the residue that stays gives you a really lovely effect. So when you turn it over, it looks like you've scraped away loads, but you haven't. So you need to be quite enthusiastic, but be careful that you don't touch that pupil. Because you can't correct that once you've done another layer. So it's okay to catch where he feathered it, but the very centre of that pupil you need to leave alone. Because if you catch a bit and don't notice and then paint another layer on top, then you've ruined it and there's just nothing you can do. Well, there is something you can do. You can get the nail varnish, wipe the whole thing off and start again, which is not ideal. So just be careful of that. So as before, going from the middle outwards. Wipe off your pin in between if it gets too much product build up. And one side's wetter than the other. I must have put a thicker coat on. So keep turning it over to check how much space there is, because we need to put 2 more colours on here. So if you haven't scraped away enough, they're just not going to show. I mean, the great thing about these is you can do as many layers as you like. You can just keep scraping, adding more, scraping. But the trouble with a cabochon this small is once you get the back built up too much, it can start to look a bit lumpy, and you've got to glue a bail onto the back of these to turn them into an earring. So I try to not do too many layers on these tiny ones for that reason. So if you hold it up to the light, you can see where the scraping has come away. So you do want there to be some metallic left, but I can see that there still needs to be more taken out here. So just keep going over. All of the artistry with dragon eye painting is what you remove, not what you put on. So it looks like you spent hours with an incredibly tiny brush, but it's all done with the scraping. You can paint with other mediums onto glass. I like to use nail varnish, first of all because it's cheap. Not cheap as in poor quality, you can get some really good quality nail varnishes for a decent price, but each one of them is in its own bottle with its own brush, so you don't have the worry of trying to clean brushes and all of that stuff, and you can get all of the different finishes. You can get the metallics and the matte and the gel finish, and because it's all painted onto glass, the final result is always going to be shiny no matter what you do. It's surprising how much of that gold still lingers when you've scraped loads off. So pupil's okay. So I'm just going to scrape a bit more. So I'm wiping my needle. I've got a little bit of nail varnish remover on some kitchen roll here, and I'm just wiping the residue off so I don't end up with a gummed up mess on the tip of that. So I'm going to go in with the blue now with a clean pin. Try to get as much of the gold off as possible. It's not the end of the world if a bit of gold ends up in here. There is a bit of gold in this sparkle anyway, but trying to keep them their own colour story. Right, so next step, there's quite a bit scratched off there. More will get scratched off in the next layers, so I think I'm happy with how they're looking. So for the next step, what I want to do is the darker colour, the darkest colour that's going to be on, and then scrape some of that away to show some ribbons of the lighter colour. So on the Eye of Sauron, the next colour is going to be this neon orange, and on the blue one it's going to be this stunning kind of sapphire blue gel nail varnish from Yvonne. I don't even remember the last time I bought anything from Yvonne. This is so old, but it's still good. So yeah, any nail varnish works on this, it's great. So I'm painting this again across all of it, but trying to not damage in any way that black pupil. You can paint over all of it. This has a bit of a translucence to it, which I wasn't expecting, but yet some of that is showing through where we scraped off, so that's good. This is not as dark or pigmented as I thought it was going to be. As I said before, my fingers have a habit of leaning on stuff they shouldn't, so this has gone on quite thickly. When the nail varnish is very wet on top like this, it's going to soften the layer below, so you have to handle them with a great deal of care at this point. Because you can very easily damage the pupil and all of the other layers that you've worked so hard to put on. So I'm going to leave these to dry for quite a while now, so I will be back in a bit. So just a quick look at the right side, and oh, that's so hard to hold. I just wanted to show you the right side before we scrape off. Really, okay, let me just put it on there. So that's what the yellow one looks like. So actually that's the orange layer, so the yellow needs to go on next, but you can kind of see that we still have quite a bit of that shimmer, so that's lovely. The pupil's intact. There's definitely space here for much more to come off. That orange is really disappointing actually. I was expecting it to be more pigmented than that. I may have to go in around the edge of this one with some of the red and then go in with the really pale yellow. Yeah, so that's the yellow one. The blue one, already beautiful. That shimmer is beyond gorgeous. So all that needs now is some scraping and the very pale blue to show through, and that one will be done. So I'm happy with that one. I do think I need to go back in on this one though and add some red around the edge just to give it a little bit more, because I don't think the yellow and the orange are going to have enough contrast. That orange is just not the neon orange that it claimed to be. I'm going to do this one first so that I can get the extra layer of red on there just to add some more contrast. I honestly thought the contrast between these two would be enough, but this one's got too much of a yellow undertone. It's just not showing through properly. That's fine, we can fix that. So what I want to do is concentrate the scraping from this one on the outer edge so that I get some red around here, which will give it more of an ombre. That's what we're kind of going for here, sort of ombre colours. So I'm going to focus the scratching right out on this outer edge rather than towards the middle. This red nail varnish came from the pound shop and it is so pigmented and so rich. It's just beautiful. So as I said, you can get some nail varnishes at a budget price but really good quality, and they work so well for this. Try to get the scraping sort of uniform on both sides so that you don't end up with more of a pale colour on one side than the other. It's never going to be fully uniform, but you do want them to have a little bit of symmetry with regards to the quantity of the different colours. And that's something that, you know, again, if you make a mistake with this and it's rubbish, you can always just get the nail varnish remover out, soak it all off and start again. You don't lose a cabochon, you just lose a bit of time and you have to start over. But the more you do, the better you get at that. So there's very little of this blue showing through despite scraping loads off. But because we've got some deep channels here, what I'm doing is kind of pushing down a little bit harder on the brush so that it's forcing the nail varnish down into those channels. It's getting quite thick and gloopy on the back now, so by doing that you're just kind of pushing down into it. So little of that is showing through, but it is there. So if you wanted to, while it's wet, you can just go in with your scalpel. So I'm just going to put the lid on the nail varnish. You can go in and just really carefully, being mindful of where your pupil is, just run this through, and that will blend some of the colours in a little bit more. That gives you a really nice effect that looks exactly like an iris on a real eye. So I'm just going through, trying to, as I said, not disturb the pupil at the middle. Just going through with it wet on this layer, and it just merges that in a bit more. So now I want to run through on this one and try to get some channels for that yellow, matte yellow, to come through. So I'm going to try with the scalpel blade again. So the red is still a little bit wet, which is okay. Again, being really careful to not touch that pupil, so important, especially the centre bit of it, because without scraping everything off you can't fix that if you scrape some away. In with the yellow. As with the blue, just kind of push it in quite hard into the channels that you've just carved out, just to make sure that it fills them and that yellow shows through. Maybe I can just go in with my pin. So always turn it over and check, just so you can see how things are looking. The more layers like this you do, the more detail there will be in the final piece. And blending wet gives you a very different effect from scraping off dry, so you'll just get used to what those effects look like and pick your favourites. This is the reason you can't ever make two that are identical. So I'm going to just back that again with a bit more yellow, and then I'll leave it alone. Okay. It's stuck to my finger. There we go. I feel this one needs some stripes of just the paler. That last coat blended the two blues together and it's beautiful, but I feel like we just need one or two stripes of just the pale. So I'm just taking a little bit away from in the middle. When I put this layer on, I'm going to leave that as well. I'm not going to touch it, not going to blend it, just add another layer of this pale just to give it contrast. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for an ombre, ultimately dark at the edge. With those pale ribbons running through near the middle. There we go. So they definitely need to sit and be left alone now for a few hours, and then I can turn them over and have a look and just review how they're looking. I'm back. It's been probably 3 hours since I did the last layer. I've gone around with my craft knife and just trimmed off a lot of the excess, but I just wanted to show you what they look like for now. I'll give you a closer look properly when they're finished, but I'm happy with those. That's about as much detail as I think I'm going to be able to get, so yeah, happy with that for now. They're so tiny, but you can see when I move them you've still got the shimmer. I'm losing daylight now, so I've got the light on. So what I need to do now, and because these are so small, I find it hard to actually glue felt on the back without having a furry mess overhanging, so I top them off with black nail varnish. So that's simple enough. Get my Barry M black nail varnish. I will clean them up properly when this layer's dry. This one needs to sit overnight because there's still a little bit of softness in here from all those layers, still a little bit tacky. This is hard to do without getting it all up the sides, so don't worry about that. It either scrapes off with a blade or you can get it off with nail varnish remover on a cotton bud. What I don't want is any visible coloured nail varnish over the sides. The minute there's nail varnish on, it gets sticky, so this is a nightmare. Oh. Okay, if I can get that to unstick from my thumb. There we go. So now just don't touch them at all. Leave them overnight. Give all of those layers of nail varnish a really good chance to fully cure. And then I will be able to clean them up and stick the bails on, ready to make them into earrings. So, see you tomorrow. Good morning, it's the next day. There we go. So they've dried, they look okay. So now I just want to clean up the edge because there's some little bits of nail varnish around the edge there that have kind of crept over. I'm going to try first of all to do this with my blade, just so that I don't accidentally get the nail varnish off the back, because I don't want to do that. And that can happen when they're this small. So I will just put those down, grab my craft blade, and just very carefully just try to scrape off any residual nail varnish that is remaining. So hardly pressing on here because you don't want to scratch the glass. All you want to do is nibble away any bits of overspill. The overspill is inevitable when you're doing them this small. These are the smallest bails that I have. They've got texture on them which makes the glue bite better. I would normally use E6000, but I don't have any of that. I do have some of this other glue, Covel Fix, which works just as well. It's got a slightly different texture. It's way runnier. So I've just noticed some more nail varnish that I missed. It's way runnier, so I tend to squeeze it onto a bit of paper, let it just kind of thicken up a smidge, and then you can control it better. So what I'll do is put the glue onto the bail and sit them there, and then I'll carefully place that on top. There is probably going to be glue overspill, but there's just not a lot you can do. These are so small, they really are very difficult to do. So yeah, there's just not a lot I can really do about that. So I'll do my best not to put too much glue on. Now this stuff just pours out of the tube the minute you get the cap off. It is so runny. So that will start to get a bit gummy now it's out in the air. So I'm going to pick a blob up. I can't even hold these, honestly. It's so hard to do. I can't even hold the bails. Everything is so small and slippery and fiddly. So I'm just trying to get a good amount of that glue. And once it thickens up, it goes stretchy. So this really is a nightmare. So set that there. Do the same on the other one. So more waiting, just got to give that time. It just needs time. Usually it takes 48 hours for this glue to fully cure. Within 24 it should be strong enough for me to get the jump rings on there and get them onto the earring posts. So yeah, just don't touch them now, leave them alone, keep them away from the cats, and hopefully they'll be fine tomorrow. Okay, final step for these earrings is to get them onto the hooks. If you use a jump ring, the jump ring will go through that way, and the earring, this part will sit pointing sideways. So you can put 2 jump rings on, but what I'm going to do is try to just carefully bend this and pop that directly onto there.